Hey, so just a real quick introduction. My name's Guy Merritt. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at KMS Technology. And it's an honor and a privilege to be here with you today. What we're going to share, and we're going to go and do a little bit of a deep dive, is talking about introducing AI into the enterprise. And throughout the morning and throughout the sessions that you've seen, we've been really enamored with the technology. But when I work with clients, sometimes I see us starting to lose our sense of purpose around the technology. As a technologist myself, we have a tendency to, well, I can do it, so I will do it. Sometimes we have to ask the question, just because you can do it, should you do it? And so what we want to be able to do is go through an exercise to think about, how do we introduce AI into the enterprise? What is a suggested path? And we're going to talk about the different generations of AI as we go through this. So I shared with you, I am the CTO at KMS. I've been doing this for a couple years now. I built my first AI engine in 1992. In 1992, we thought we achieved the Holy Grail. We are building expert systems. We thought we were done. And then we realized we were very, very limited in what they could do. So now today, fast forward, we're going to start exploring, how do we take some of the new advances and to bring that into that enterprise space. KMS, we are an engineering services company. We don't build products or sell products. We do build a lot of products for people. But we also bring our knowledge of building those products into the enterprise space and to people who want to have something special purpose-built for them. And that is our purpose. So what we're going to share today, we're going to go over a couple different items. We're going to talk about the business drivers. At the end of the day, this isn't about the technology, but it is about the economics. Why are we even pushing AI into the enterprise? It is all about the economics. We're going to talk about some of the rationalization behind that. Now, another big item that we're going to walk through, and I have a very simple design pattern that we're going to use as an example, and we're going to look at a legacy system, and then we're going to show how we start to introduce different generations of AI and the different purposes of AI. And now, most of you probably are very aware of, AI obviously is not new. Alan Turing, I think he actually coined the phrase back when first computers were invented, of artificial intelligence. What's changed for us in the last several years is the rate of computation, the cost of computation and memory is now driven so low that we're able to build, when we created the large language models, that made a huge impact on us. But 40 years ago, technically, we could have done it, but we were missing one key item. What we were missing back then was the data. Now we have 40 years of the internet and 40 years of all that data that's now being used to build foundational models, large language models in particular. When you think about it, a large language model today can take about 6 months and $10 million. A lot of my clients will ask, well, shouldn't I just build my own foundational model? Well, you could, but as soon as you build it, it's 6 months out of date, and you just lost $10 million, and that model is really trained on all of your data. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. That having the foundational model, the LLM, that was trained on public data, then coupling that with RAG, retrieval augmented generation. We'll talk a little bit about that. So once we start to understand what we're trying to attack on the business workflows, how do we approach it? And so we advocate 3 core pillars. We first want to talk through the process of preparation. We'll talk about diagnosing, then we'll talk about implementing. And then at the end, I'll give you a case study. Now, as I shared, KMS, we are an engineering services company. So when I meet with clients, I do a lot of work with them on their strategies, their rollouts, their implementations of AI. And if my company is going to try to coach and advise people, well, we better be a pretty strong user of it. So we need to be drinking our own champagne. So the case study I'm going to share with you is putting all these pieces together, how it applied at KMS. And I'll show you an example of it. So what is the drive? Why are we looking at doing this? So everyone is fixated, being driven, massive pressures from your C-suite, from the board. But let's start looking at some of the data. That by this year, what we're seeing is, and this data comes from Gartner, but I suspect it's now already out of date, that 75% of enterprises will be adopting at least some form of AI. I think that number is actually greater today, but it was 75%. But the challenge we're running into is, according to Gartner, and what you're seeing up there, is that 70% of the projects that are getting deployed are failing. Now, what's that mean? It is not the technology. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and I'll share it now. When I meet with my clients and I work with them, you'll rarely ever hear me say proof of concept. You don't need to prove the technology works. We are literally spending trillions, not billions, trillions of dollars on this technology. The technology works. So the real question is, does the technology work for me? Does it give me the value that I need? So you'll hear us talk about the proof of value. So when we say 70% failure rate, what that means, they did not get into production. And the roadside is littered with POCs, proof of concepts, that just sit there that never went anywhere. And we're going to talk about, today's talk is really how do we mitigate against that. But the opportunity is huge. Now, I debated when we were coming up with the topics for this talk, that last bullet, the opportunity, I really wanted to do a whole presentation understanding what are the ROIs, what are they really looking like. So at any given time at my company, we have 60 to 80 projects underway that are using AI-enabled software development life cycles and a variety of different tools. So when we look at that, we see a huge sigma in productivity gains. We have seen some crazy numbers. We've seen productivity increase, in some instances, 26 times. But the other side of that spectrum, we also seen productivity get decreased by up to 20%, decreased. And so when we get into this area, it's really, there's three components when we start looking at introducing AI into the workflow that you have to take into account. The people side, change management becomes a huge imperative. You have to take into account the process, the workflow itself to re-engineer it. And then lastly is the technology itself, and that's where we have a tendency to get fixated. But I can tell you, rarely is the failures because of the technology. It's either the people side or the process side. And our own research does show, though, when appropriately employed into the workflow, we have seen productivity gains right around 30, up to 32%, in some instances far beyond that, but when we average it out, we are seeing our productivities around 32%, and we see a significant reduction in defects in our software that we're releasing into the field. So that's the opportunity. That's what we're looking at. Now, when an enterprise is looking to say, look, I feel the pressure, I gotta put this AI into my systems. The challenge we have now, we have a zoo of AI technologies. So now we're seeing the rise of whole new strategies. Like 3 years ago, I could probably count on one hand how many companies had an AI strategy. Today, every company is racing to create their own AI strategy. We are now seeing the rise of the chief AI leader of the organization. So the whole element strategically is now changing. So that we're seeing that, how do we create that and build that? We're all facing and seeing how embedded generative AI to help with that content generation, it is now being integrated. How do I take the power of the LLM, bring that into my enterprise to help create new and original content? Now, and by the way, it's interesting, generative AI workflows to us in the industry, we view that as now kind of old technology. Well, gosh, that's already 3 years old. Now everything we're hyper-fixated on agentic AI. How do we bring that into the enterprise? Whereas agentic AI is bringing into the party that ability to have dynamic, autonomous, and automated operations. That is right now the new holy grail we're racing to. But underpinning all of this, what has not changed in the last 40 years is still the need for data and AI engineering, or the data engineering in particular. Those are foundational items. As a matter of fact, it is becoming more important as you start to introduce something like an agentic AI that is actually starting to make decisions. If it is making decisions on uncurated data, you will have a problem. So we need to keep the foundations intact. Also, ML ops and development. This is probably one of the biggest areas that I see today with clients where they're struggling. They get enamored with the technologies, but it's almost at times they don't actually plan for success. Well, what happens when you actually deploy this? It's not a fire and forget. If you are building some type of model, even if you're using traditional AI and you're using machine learning algorithms to build a predictive model, you just don't throw it into production and let it set. As we scale up, and AI, and I've met with several clients and they now have a mantra, AI everywhere. Problem is, they now are going to have AI everywhere. So what they really need to have is understanding how we're going to manage AI, particularly when it's making autonomous operations. How do I do continuous monitoring? How do I know when I need to retire a model, when I need to retrain a model? Especially if it's making workflow decisions for you. And then lastly, virtually every single SaaS company, SaaS, I know our colleagues from SAS is here. Virtually every single SaaS company has on their roadmap, if not already on the roadmap, to introduce intelligent product features. And this is coming from all the investors to put pressures on what's going to happen with the SaaS business. How fast do you get AI into your core offering? Now, I could do a whole presentation just on that particular topic also, because what we are going to see is a radical transformation in the design patterns for platforms of the future. Over the next 2 to 3 years, I think we're going to see some really fundamental changes with how these platforms evolve. But right now, and for today, the race is on how to put intelligent product features in to help in the SaaS world. So this is all the inventory of things we've got to work on. This is what's facing everybody. This is a big list. And the challenge with almost every enterprise I work with, it's always the one challenge: scarcity of resources. We don't have enough people who actually understand this holistically enough to truly get it. So there's a challenge there that we have. Now, what does it mean? I was sharing about, how do we put AI into the enterprise workflow? So let me kind of go through a simple example to show this. So we're going to take a very tried and true application. Now, this is a very, very simple representation behind it, but this is just for the sake of the conference. What I want to show you is a CPQ application. That's configure, price, and quoting. Think of that virtually, if you're shipping products today that has many different configurations you use and you quote it for clients or your customers, you're using CPQ. I got to configure it. What does the client need? If it has a million different types of parts, what's the prices of those parts? And then I finally want to issue a quote into the field. And today, this system that exists is pulling information from part specs. I got to understand, and the different parts of different revisions have different performance characteristics, so I need to have a database of the part specs. I need the ERP. The ERP may be the home for where all the pricing is located. And then lastly, the contracts. So when you go to do the quote, you could have a contract with the client, and that has different terms and conditions. It may have inclusion and exclusions on that. CPQ systems and the applications are very, very helpful today. But this process is very manual. There still is a lot of human interactions with it. So let's use this as an example to talk about how we're evolving AI to introduce it into a legacy application such as CPQ. So a lot of people are doing an AI subsystem overlay. Some people will call it an AI wrapper. I start wrapping around, or I overlay on top of the application or the platform with an new AI infrastructure. In Gen 1 of this, we introduced machine learning algorithms. We were making predictions. We've been doing this for 40 years. That we take data, remember machine learning algorithms, really all we're doing is discovering patterns in past data. And once I understand those patterns, then I can make a prediction what the future is going to do. So we've been doing this for a long time. We've introduced this. And by the way, one of the key points I want you to take away from this slide, there is no AI panacea. They need to work together because the different AI technologies solve different problems, and that's what I'm illustrating here. There is still a great need for traditional AI, it's funny to say that now, traditional AI for machine learning. Gen 2, about three and a half years ago, now we bring in generative AI. And the big breakthrough was the release of the foundational models, the large language models themselves. Now, in that first model, or the first in machine learning, its purpose was, in this example, it could predict a price, a seasonal price. It knows the trends of it and it predicts that. Now, with the second gen, generative AI plus RAG being retrieval augmented generation. Remember, and some of this, I know we have a mixed audience here, and I apologize for going over some of the basics on this, but remember, our generative AI typically has been trained on public data, and at best, it's 6 months out of date, or typically 6 months out of date. And an LLM has not been trained on your company's private data. If it was, you got another problem. So, and we have seen that actually happen, company data that has been found its way into public LLMs. So there's a whole new security realm around how to manage the use of these public LLMs and company data. So the way we keep it current, that's where RAG comes in. RAG gives us that interaction of to get that public data or our company private data, but also has near real-time data. And we can fuse that together and use the LLM's capabilities to feed it into there, and we can give a seamless interaction to the user that looks like it's all that the LLM actually knows your private data. It really doesn't. Now, how do I use that? Well, once again, the use case is much different than the machine learning. Whereas machine learning was about predicting things based upon existing data patterns, generative AI in this case, we're using it to create an analysis. We're using it to create, oops, I knew I was going to get this backwards. We use this to create a narration for quoting. A very powerful tool within an LLM when it makes a prediction, when it's displaying the text that it's predicting, is really, really good at that. And so in this example, it can help in a quoting process to give an analysis and to automate the narration that you're going to put in there. Huge time saver. Now, Gen 3 comes along. Now we're talking about an agentic AI. With agentic AI, now in this example, what it does, it's going to automate the pricing process, but what it does is dynamically. So I talked earlier in my intro that I said I built an expert AI system back in 1992. The problem was it was only as good as the rules that we put in it at that time. And so now what we're able to do by using an agentic AI approach in this workflow, the CPQ workflow, it can dynamically adjust pricing based upon a new set of data coming into it. Let me give you an example here. The machine learning algorithm does a great job of predicting price curves over seasonality. What it does not know, in this case, if there was a hurricane or a tsunami that erupted and hit Taiwan, disrupted the supply chain of parts that needed to come in. It will not predict that. It'll still give you the same price. But a properly engineered agentic AI system will understand new data has come in. I need to factor that in and adjust this pricing, or autonomously go find another supplier for that part that just got disruptive, cancel this order, place it over here, and do that dynamically. But it did that in response to a new set of rules that the machine learning algorithm didn't know anything about. So this is, for me, this is one of the big important slides here, because this is where we're taking, it's not a one-size-fits-all. This is showing that we need to use the right technology to solve the right problem. So when we think about an AI transformation for the workflow, we got to think about the big boulders. And I put 3 of them. The 3 big boulders we think about is preparation, diagnosing, and implementation. So in the preparation, it seems so intuitive. But you would be shocked how many people I see are not defining what is the business outcome you want to seek. What are you trying to achieve? That needs to be question 1. Not if I'm going to do Gen AI or agentic AI. Focus on this business problem. For instance, the driver may be, I want to reduce my operational costs. I want to improve productivity. I want to improve quality around there. Then we move into, once I understand the prep, then I diagnose. This is just no different than a doctor. When we go to a doctor today, you just don't get medicine, you just don't get a treatment. The very first thing the doctor does is a diagnosis. What is the proper treatment? Well, I can only answer that when we've done a diagnosis. So in this model, we got to understand, just like a doctor, what do I need to add inside of that workflow to address the business outcomes I want to achieve? And then lastly is implementation. Defining a framework to say, what do I need to do to make this repeatable? In larger organizations, I see a very common issue happening today. I see a whole lot of individual activities, but it's not actually coordinated. We see a lot of different divisions, functional groups, everybody's going down their own path, and they're spending a lot of money when they could have been a little bit more coordinated if they would have had an agreed upon framework of how we're going to move forward. Now I'm going to take a little bit of a dive in each one of these. What does that look like? So in preparation, this is another takeaway slide. For anybody working with the enterprise, please, please focus on the problem. For instance, in this example I'm giving is, we want to reduce support tickets by 40%. This becomes your overriding requirement that you want to focus on and drive to. Now, how to do this is actually kind of the fun part. In here, you see in here, we talk about mapping the workflow. How do we do this? Well, what's important, just like the doctor piece and the diagnosing, this is actually part of the diagnosing. But what we want to be able to do is look at today's workflow, understand the bottlenecks. We use a technique called, the underlying technique is called process mining, to understand what's actually happening in the workflow. And then we know what to go attack as we move forward. And once again, we define the goals that we're striving, and then what's the stakeholders we need to bring in. You'll hear me talk about this a little later on the implementation side, but you'll always hear me talk about a crawl, walk, run model. So get it right, build your own case study, and then we start to land and expand within the enterprise. But I know this seems intuitive that, well, of course we have a problem. But I have been with more clients than not that have not defined this problem. More times than not, their problem they define when I ask is, well, our board says we have to do it. Okay, well, that is a type of problem. I grant it, I give you that. But if the board is really wanting to say, show me business results, they're going to ask about the business outcome. Data engineers, data scientists in the rooms, and I really can't see, so sorry. So, all right, so don't get mad at me, but every time I want to talk with our clients about data governance, they always say the same thing, it's boring. And I'm like, guys, you're worried about putting a better roof on your house and your foundation's made of sand. Please don't do this. Data and AI governance, but even more so the data governance is such a business imperative. Now, let me qualify when I make this statement. I am not saying the entire enterprise needs to be under this new data governance program. Remember, crawl, walk, run. The areas that you're going to attack first, get that house in order, and then you can scale it a little later. Don't do everything, but look at it more for a vertical view initially, as opposed to a full horizontal view throughout the organization. But we've been doing this. Data governance has been around forever, and I'm still advocating it's going to become more important. The reason it's going to get more important, the introduction of agentic AI into the enterprise, where you have autonomous decisions getting made, if it is working off of uncurated data, you are going to get bad outcomes. It is inevitable. So get the data governance right. Here's an example of a governance. I'm not saying this is right or wrong, or you have to follow this. I just want to give you, what do we look for? If someone says I have a data governance program, then I want to see, what does it look like? We set up and established the clear objectives around it. We set up the data quality and a standardization behind this. Standardization is really, really key on this, particularly at the very beginning of some industry workflows. Where I'll give you an example, if you're getting invoices coming in, as much as you can have that standardized, it just makes your life ultimately easier. Now, it's not always possible, but that's an example of what I mean by standardization. It just makes life easier. Compliance and security. This is unbelievably important now, because now most of us in the room are probably familiar with the concept of data poisoning. People know what data poisoning is? Yeah. So for those that may not be fully aware of it, data poisoning is when I go into your data set, I artificially change it, and then I retrain a model based upon corrupted data. So think about that. If you build your own agentic AI, and you don't have good data governance, and you're going to train a model that agentic AI will call upon, it could intentionally give you erroneous results because somebody corrupted the data set that was used. And this has had a big impact on my company, where we've had to put in extra security guards, safeguards, if you will, around to ensure, to detect, and that we understand the curated data sets, particularly where you're training models. And it's not even have to be training models. Even if you're just using RAG in combination of agentic AI and it's using your company data. I actually had a client say to me, they wanted their RAG implementation to go to the user's desk and get an Excel spreadsheet, because this person had all the data. I said, we could do that. Remember, I said just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it. We could do that. But if you build an agentic system off of using that type of data, you're going to get a bad result. So it may be boring, but it's so important. Diagnosing. At the diagnosing stage, you got to understand, if you're an enterprise, and I'm not saying if you're a data science company, but I'm saying, or an AI company, I'm talking about if you're the enterprise and you want to introduce AI into your organization, you got to think through that technology stack. What am I willing to undertake for myself What am I willing to outsource? What am I willing to partner with? Because the complexity in this stack over here can get overwhelming. And now this particular example I was using, if you were using AWS as your cloud service provider, there's a set of tools you could use. The amount of tools that are being introduced is literally every day new tools are coming online. And they're getting adopted very, very fast. We had a conversation earlier about MCP, and we were talking about it. For those who may be familiar with Model Context Protocol, that was just introduced in February. It is now becoming almost a de facto standard within 6 months. And we'll show a little bit of example what that looks like. So you have to decide, what part am I going to play? How much of this knowledge do I want internally for my organization? And once you made a decision to undertake that AI and you're going to develop it, you're going to create it, you're going to use it, a lot of organizations need to understand, where am I on the maturity curve? What is my readiness on here? Because one thing we do know, virtually all AI strategies today are wrong. It's the only thing we know for certain. The reason they're wrong, the rate of innovation, the rate of change we're dealing with just on the AI tool set is changing at an unprecedented rate. So what you thought was right today could be wrong tomorrow. So what we want to be able to do is understand that your transformation starts on a journey. So you can establish yourself here's where my known maturity level is. I'm putting in some of the improvements, and then I reassess, and I know that I've went up on my maturity curve. And we do that in conjunction with measuring our business outcomes. This way we know that we're getting better. This is just an example of what an assessment would look like. And there's a few AI maturity models that are out there today by NIST. Gartner has one. KMS, we've developed one. So there's a variety of different models to help you assess where you are in your AI journey. So now what I've done is I've completed my diagnosis. Now I want to be able to jump into it. And I got to jump in my implementation. Once again, having that implementation framework is an imperative. You want to have consistency in the way you're approaching this, even if you're running many parallel projects. The reason is, if you're going to run multiple projects, and if you're running different implementation frameworks to roll it out, how are you ever going to compare the results that came out? You want to be able to say what worked, what didn't work on these processes. You want to compare across organizations. How many, and like I said, it's hard for me to see, but many organizations today are using tools in the software development, like generative AI tools, Cursor, Business Copilot. Anybody using tools like that today? Okay, a few hands. When we look at using these tools that are they're immensely helping us. But what we have found when we start to introduce it into the workflows, that there's a huge variation. I talked about that productivity number. We had a very wide sigma on the productivity gains we see. What's driving that is people, process, and technology. What we have found, if you want to really do well with a generative AI code generation tool, it works best. Our data shows us somebody that's got 8 years software engineering experience, understands the domain, and they're building new greenfield code of moderate complexity. Where we find the tools do not work so well, and this is in our data and our experience, it comes in when we take a junior person, very few years of experience, we put them on legacy code that's complex. And when we introduce AI into that enterprise workflow for the software development lifecycle, what we see is the opposite. We see productivity dramatically drop off. First example I gave you, we see the productivity dramatically go up. We have seen 2.5 to 3x improvements. We've seen up to 30% reduction in productivity when it's legacy, complex, junior people using these tools. So the implementation framework that you're following, that's what this early stages are all about. Crawl, walk, run. Ideate where you want to explore, where you're going to work. You build your proof of value, get it in there, and then you make these systematic decisions around, then I'm ready to scale. But along the way, though, you're evaluating through this framework the people, the process, and the technology. Change management is so important, and change management being that's how human behavior needs to change in the face of these new technologies, the new processes that I'm using. How do I ensure the people are being trained and they understand it? So let me share with you an example of an outcome. So I shared with you that if I'm going to be working with clients and say, well, this is how you should do it, I should be drinking my own champagne. So I will share with you in a public forum our approach, and I'll show you what we did and how we approached it. First thing that we wanted to focus on, our business outcome, we said, look, we want to increase developer productivity. There are some other metrics behind this. There's also, we wanted to, in essence, also reduce the overall SDLC, the software development lifecycle, by upwards a certain amount of %. And we wanted to reduce the absolute number of defects that we're inducing into the field. So we had these major objectives. This is what we wanted to go after. So we defined that as our problem statement. It also said we wanted to have a vision. What do we believe as an engineering organization? How do we see the evolution in the face of these emerging technologies? How will a software engineer's life become different? This is our vision. This is what we see happening and what we're implementing today. So we have a classic software engineer. The software engineer of the future now is becoming a master of AI and data science. They are responsible for providing oversight, complexity management, and integrations. And they must increase their domain knowledge of what they're working with. It helps immensely. Historically, we just relegated that to maybe business analysts who did that, but the software engineer of the future needs to better understand the domains. The reason is, when we start doing code generation tools, we want to be able to detect, we still keep human in the loop for now, to detect if something goes wrong, if the thing is starting to hallucinate. Now, in our vision, this is where it gets a little different. We are introducing the concept, we use the concept, we call it, many people are familiar with digital twins. Digital twins are virtual representations of some physical entity. For us, a personal digital twin is a virtual representation of the software engineer. In the future, the agents that we pair with our engineers learns the good, the bad, and the ugly. Our objective is to start to establish context of its human. Now the PDT, which is think of it as an agent for now, it performs all the simple and mundane tasks. Think of code generation. Now this is our workflow, the software development lifecycle. If it was CPQ, it would be different. If it was an invoicing system, it would be different. But I'm showing you our workflow, how we build. The PDT, it is an agent, but what's so special about it? He now has project context awareness. Now, why is that really, really important? Even today, in the most modern software development systems, particularly on a large-scale project, one of the challenges we see when we have a lot of software engineers working in parallel, redundant functionality inevitably gets created. It happens. The PDT is context aware of the other agents. It now becomes aware of what's been created. The PDTs now start to coordinate their actions within the system to make its partner, the human, even more productive. Hey, don't tell me to build that. Somebody's already built one, I'm going to use that. Another PDT in another country on the same project built it. bringing it in. So we defined a vision that we're going to lead to, and that we're marching to how we're viewing the world now. So this is the workflow plan, our implementation framework that we're going to attack. So we outlined a strategy, and this was a new strategy, by the way. 2 years ago, we already implemented generative AI, introduced LLMs into our software development process. This is now the agentic base. So our next version is around how are we going to add agentic AI into the SDLC process. So we come through and we'll show an example of this. There's a lot of tools. If there's a commercial tool available, we would prefer to use it. If it doesn't exist and we have a need, we'll have to invest. We build it ourselves. We discover how we can best get a LLM to work on some particular objective. We then go into a 3 to 4 month period of expansion to start gently expanding it out to broader teams. And then we go, and all of it is about learning. So kind of think of this process as the way we train a model. In the beginning, we don't know a lot, but as we get farther along, we know more and more, and we start to converge on an answer. And that's what we're doing in phase 3. We're now fine-tuning our model. We're fine-tuning the process that we're working on. Now, we had to map out, and I did a simplified diagram here of a software development lifecycle. And what I wanted to show you guys, this is just a very small sampling of the tools that are now available. And there's a couple challenges with these tools. Very few tools actually cut through the entire software development lifecycle. Most of the tools we're seeing today, most of them are around the development. I'm generating a lot of code. It's working amazingly well in the right context of people, process, and technology. The next area we see of more maturity is on the back end, in the back end of implementation on the test side. We're seeing some phenomenal work take place in testing using agentic AI, where we can automate the entire process of reading in a story in Jira, having it understand to write all the test cases autonomously, and then I can build a test campaign, and I can actually then go execute it by itself. It'll do that today. There's a lot of good work going on in this area. And now what we want to start working on is these front ends. So ultimately, we want to start getting better agents to understand the requirements that we got to build, whether it's an industry standard and a customer's requirement, understanding that and trying to automate that process. And we're less mature as an industry on the front end of this. Now, in our business, this is a compounding problem for us, because if we introduce AI into our clients' work, we have to get permission from them. So we've set an internal policy, part of our AI governance, that we do not do any work with AI paired up with our engineers unless we have permission from the client. Furthermore, some of our clients then dictate and give us requirements of which tools are authorized to be used. One of the cool things for us as an engineering services company, we end up having to learn a lot of different tools. So we get to see kind of like I said earlier, the good, the bad, and the ugly of the different tool sets. But the big upside for us, we feel, is giving us unprecedented insights of how to actually improve your software development process with the different set of tools. So this is kind of and oh, by the way, one last item up here, you see this Bloom filter. As we're changing the workflow, we're changing the SDLC, we're measuring the business outcomes, but what is the health of this process? How well is it performing? So we work with a company called Bloom Filter. Kind of think of it kind of put sensors into the SDLC, and it's helping us measure the performance. So as we're turning knobs, it's giving us the results. Did we have a good turn or a bad turn? So we're monitoring our process, just not the output of the process, but we're managing the intra-process performance to make sure we're trying to do things right, that we're seeing real improvements. Now, This is kind of like the requirements. So what have we done? What does this look like in our world? So we first had to decide what tools are we going to select. Remember I talked about the people side of this? So not only are we selecting the technology, but the people side was really important. So over here, you see step number 4, we train the teams, that's people side, but we have communities and supports. We've reintroduced and expanded what we call guilds within our organization. And now we've introduced guilds across all of our different disciplines, project management, BA, software engineering, data science, AI, each one now has its own guild. The idea is, as we introduce AI in each one of those areas, we want them to form a sense of community about their craft and to work together, and the group of practitioners are deciding what tools work for their discipline. So, and I apologize, it doesn't, the arrows are a little bit hard to see on the diagram. So one of the things that we've done then, putting all those pieces together is, hey, look, our vision is to radically increase the productivity of our engineers for the betterment of our clients. Our mission then becomes we are investing in our own agent orchestration framework that works throughout the entire SDLC. The goal is to deliver impact early, validate continuously, and our objective, our business outcome is we want to gain productivity by 1.5 to 2x. These are our objectives. What we are building, and is operational today, is something we call VLOX. So for us, VLOX understands the workflow, in our case, the workflow being the SDLC, and is also role-based workflows. It understands that not all agents are the same. So we've designed agents that work with the BA, the business analyst. There are agents that work with the developer for code generation. And then there are agents on the test side to automate test creation and to automate the execution of those tests. We also wanted the ability to be agnostic or use multiple LLMs. So one of the things that we've done, and if you guys, those are heavy into the LLM world, you know that the challenge we have with the LLMs in any AI model is we're going from a deterministic world to a probabilistic world. You know, we were very, very comfortable that 1 + 1 = 2 every single time. Well, now we got to be a little comfortable that 1 + 1 might be 1.9, 1 + 1 might be 2.1. We got some variation now. We're dealing with probabilities. So one of the things that we do is we run a comparison, run multiple LLMs, and try to find the best fit. Which one do we think gives us a better option? And then I'll say a little bit about this. And by the way, these are tools that are in there. Many of you, sure you use these tools. Wherever possible, we have settled on Model Context Protocol to be our primary interface to any tool in the SDLC. On a go-forward basis, no new tools will be selected in our company, in our workflows, unless it has an MCP interface. We just made that decision. It makes it much, much easier now to do integrations when we bring in the other tools that are part of this environment. Now, if they don't have an MCP interface, we don't necessarily throw it out, but what we have to do is work with some traditional API or some traditional interfacing to that. So this is our new workflow, and there's another process. Time doesn't allow me to go into the details behind it. So what's the results? How have we done thus far? Well, industry is saying, hey, software development groups, you should see up to a 45% productivity improvement. What we have seen thus far is up to 32%. Now, buyer beware, we have a very, very wide sigma on this. And we're working now to reduce the variation. But part of that variation is being smart of who is using the tools, what is the process that we're using, and the type of technology that we're creating. Making good decisions there, we have now learned, can help reduce that variation and actually increases the productivity we're seeing. Now, Some of you out there who may be purists say, hey, you really can't measure engineering productivity. I understand, folks, we've wrestled with that problem 40 years ago, for 40 years at least that I've been doing it. What we made a decision was we're just simply going to measure our productivity by using story points per sprint. Not all story points are the same, but because of the large number of projects we do, we're betting on the law of large numbers. If we're consistent in our measurement, that's what we're doing. So we didn't want to overthink it, but we're using this, and we do see significant improvements on this. So today's talk, what I was shared with you guys is I went over what are some of the business drivers. Some of the big business drivers, and the number one item we want to counter is this failure rate. We don't want to have a 70% failure rate of introducing AI because the upside potential is phenomenal. But you've got to follow a disciplined approach to introducing it. If you have everybody's doing their own thing, everybody's doing it differently, it's going to be very hard to ever calculate your ROIs and what's the true impacts that I'm measuring. I gave you an example of taking a legacy workflow. I shared with you how we not always using, it's not one size fits all, but knowing what type of AI to use. Maybe it's traditional machine learning algorithms. Knowing I want to create new content, and I'm going to use generative AI to do that. And lastly, I want to automate something in my process and make it dynamic and intelligent. So I'm going to introduce an agentic AI approach. To get you started on that journey, we talked about the 3 pillars of understanding how to prepare, understanding that we need to have the good data governance methods in place. Most importantly, what's our problem outcome that we're trying to solve? Then we're going to go into diagnosing. Remember, think like a doctor. Before we introduce some implementation, we got to make sure we understand what's wrong. We got to make sure we're understanding what does good look like. What's the outcome that we want to have? Lastly, we talked about consistency in implementing your AI in the enterprise journey, having an agreed upon framework to try to make it consistent so you can measure and compare across the organization. And then lastly, I shared with you how at KMS, how we took that examples and what we're advocating for industry and with our clients, how we've actually applied it to ourselves. And I openly shared with you our results we're seeing. It's a journey. We're not there completed yet, but we've already seen enough in the last, and we've been doing this now for almost 3 years. The agentic almost now, or the agentic is only like 3 months old of introducing that, but we're seeing the positive gains. But we also have been very disciplined of how we're approaching it. So I thank you for your time today, folks. If anybody wants, there is a QR code. You can take a picture. You can download these slides. They are available. And we got about 5 minutes. Oh, I just got pulled off stage. All right. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.